like to call this special call meeting of the Sumner County Board of Education into order. Before we do, I'm going to stand for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance to our country's flag. If you'd like to join me, please feel free to do so. Join me in the pledge, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, the only order of business that we have on the special call meeting is discussion and action of the approval of bids for fencing for Gallatin High School football. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second. Motion approved by Mr. Daniels, second by Mr. Wise. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. The special call meeting is now adjourned. And we'll start call the meeting to order for the study session. And first item on the agenda for that is discussion regarding a revision to policy 5.301, leaves of absence prior to first reading. Dr. Langford?
Yes, so Mr. Ott, feel free to jump in if I miss something. Basically, what we're looking at here is the legislature approved 6 weeks of paid FMLA leave for maternity, paternity. So they did that for certified staff, and they are providing some funding statewide. Now, we don't have any of the rules yet on how we will be reimbursed for that. As we've been deliberating and looking at the law, our determination is that we think the right thing to do is not just do that for certified staff, but do that for all staff. So our proposal in this policy is to cover 6 weeks of maternity and paternity leave for all employees, certified and classified, and we will do that. This bill, when it passed, it went into effect the day that the governor signed, which was in May. So what we will do if we pass this on August 22nd, what we will do is Mr. Ott and his team, Ms. Brown, will go back and everybody who took leave in the time, once the law went into effect, will be reimbursed for the time that they used. So we think that's, we're really excited about this because we think, again, we always try to do what we can to give the most support to our employees, and this is another way for us to support them. In terms of, we had looked at, we don't have a good measuring stick exactly for the cost because historically we have not had a lot of paternity leave taken. I would anticipate that paternity leave would increase. I think it's great for families of Sumner County, but we will crank those numbers and be able to get we'll have a little bit better idea financially the impact based on when we figure out how the state will reimburse us and what they will reimburse for the certified. Of course, obviously we're just going to invest the money in our classified employees to provide the same coverage for them.
Ms. Andrews?
Yep. Just want to apologize for being late. I was coming from AP Scholars, and so if you said that anything I asked, I do apologize, but just want to make sure. So this would be for all full-time employees, both classified and certified. That would include, will that include our bus drivers, cafeteria workers, janitors, all staff?
All classified, all full-time staff.
Okay, and bus drivers are considered full-time as well, correct?
Yes.
So for those purposes, we will make it retroactive.
To the date the law went into effect.
Okay.
I believe, Mr. Rosen?
Yes, that's correct.
May 12th?
May 11th.
May 11th.
Yep.
May 11th.
And then with typical FMLA leave, then they have to take their days, like accumulated days first, or that's how they're paid. This will not interfere with those accumulated days, or it will? How does?
Yeah, that's how the law is written. So they don't have to take any sick leave or personal leave to cover those first 6 weeks.
Okay.
So they'll be paid for 6 weeks. And then after that, they can take any accumulated leave that they have for the remaining.
So if they had, say, an additional 2 weeks, they could take 8 weeks total that would be paid. The first 6 weeks would be paid under this provision, and then the other 2 would be under the accumulated time off that they had at that point.
Correct. And the accrued leave that they have.
And this is, if I've read this correctly, though, that is within a consecutive 12-month period. So,
That's the qualifying period. That's correct.
and they have to work for the district for a year prior to receiving.
Correct.
Okay. Let me scroll through this real quick, make sure there wasn't another question I had.
We've made a lot of revisions to this policy as a result of obviously this law change, and then also what's happened in the past with a little investigation that we had. So we've incorporated a lot of language into the policy, and therefore there was some delay. We just wanted to make sure that we got it right. And this is first reading, and we may go through some revisions after this first reading, but at this point in time, that's what it is.
Oh, just want to voice my support for it. I think that for our employees, that this is going to be a benefit that will help us recruit and retain, since we are extending it not just to our certified employees, but also our classified employees. So I appreciate the effort that's been done on this, and I look forward to supporting it.
If I can just provide the board with some numbers, in 21-22 school year, we had 105 people that went out that would have been covered by this policy, and last year we had 106, so one extra. So the numbers are probably going to be true to this year also. We may see an uptick as a result of maybe the paternity leave, but right now they're holding.
Thank you, Ms. Andrews. Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just 2 quick questions. How soon, after this passes, if it passes, how soon would our employees see that retroactive pay? So, for example, if they took a leave in June, how soon would they see the retroactive pay, and would that be a lump sum?
I mean, we'll move as quickly as we can. I mean, for some, like depending on the number of sick leave days that they had, so let's say if they had enough sick leave days to cover the 6 weeks, they would feel it almost immediately because they didn't lose any income.
Right.
We would just credit back their sick leave days. If they had a mix where they, like I'm thinking like my first year teaching, we had a baby and I lost 2 weeks pay because I didn't have enough sick days accumulated. So that would have been, we would catch their payback, but probably with, yeah.
We'll work with HR on the numbers they have, and we will pull those analysis, and we want to make sure it's right. So I can't commit to it's going to be this date. I'd have to work with my payroll team. This is on top of our normal monthly payroll and a year-end close. So hopefully it's actually, soon as possible, but I've got to get with Craig and see what those numbers are, audit that. Like Scott said, it's not just everybody gets 6 weeks of pay. It could be various sick leave, reimbursed, all of that. So
Would it be a reasonable expectation for by the next pay period?
not necessarily.
No? Okay. And then, I don't know how likely this even is on the calendar, but if an employee was already in the middle of their leave when the law went into effect, will that be?
Yeah, so that was one of the issues that we had to involve our board attorney with and looking at. I think there's still some difference of opinion about if they would be given the full 6 weeks, because the law is really uncertain about if you go back in time before the law and count 6 weeks before the law, or start from when the law was enacted. So I think we need to have some further clarification.
I think, Mr. Graham, I think what I'm hearing you say is like, let's say you were 2 weeks in before the law and you took another 4 weeks, we would reimburse for that 4 weeks after the law.
Right, that's what I'm asking.
We would.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Mr. Lancaster?
The 30-day notice, is that part of the law, or is that what we're putting in? Only concern there is that enough time to, in some cases, find a substitute, replacement, whatever, for that time period?
30-day notice. Where are you reading that answer?
It's basically just on the how do I request, it says give notice at least 30 days before your need for the FMLA leave.
I think that's in the law.
Yeah, I believe that is in the law. We want at least 30 days notice.
That's what I just didn't know if that was the legal requirement.
It is the legal
or if that was
requirement.
ours. If
Yeah.
it was ours, I would.
And I think the overwhelming majority of our employees, if it's a pregnancy, they usually, you know, because most of our teachers, if they're going to be out, they want their class well taken care of while they're out. So they're going to give, you know, the only thing where I think this would come into play is if you had something that was beyond our employees' control, like an emergency situation or something like that.
Yeah, that language that's under bullet point 3 is all from the federal law and provided by the Department of Labor to us.
Mr. Lancaster, Ms. Hawkins?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am trying to understand the certain qualifying reasons related to the foreign deployment of your spouse, child, or parent who is a military service member. It doesn't explain what those qualifying reasons are. Can you enlighten me as to what that's about? That's under eligible employees can take up to 12 work weeks of FMLA leave in a 12-month period for certain qualifying reasons related to the foreign deployment of your spouse, child, or parent.
So they give active members of the military now time to be with their spouse, whoever is leaving on deployment, in advance of that deployment. So that's one of the reasons.
Thank you, Ms. Hawkins. Mr. Daniels?
Yes, so quick question. So in order to qualify for this leave, an employee has to complete the paperwork for FMLA. And FMLA, I think one of the bullet points was that FMLA is not paid leave, which technically it's not. However, this policy is saying that in the event of, or this policy is saying that in the event of an action in which an employee needs to use it, they can get the 6 weeks of paid leave, correct? Because there's a bullet down here that says, right under 3, it says you have the right to use FMLA, and then down below it, it says FMLA leave is not paid leave.
Well, that is the policy from the federal government.
Okay,
The Tennessee law supersedes that.
gotcha.
And that's why we incorporated the Tennessee law language down further in the policy.
Okay.
So if you go down to, I believe, where it says Tennessee, trying to find it.
It's under parental leave.
It's under
Yeah.
parental
Look
leave,
under
yeah.
B, number
Gotcha.
1, Tennessee parental leave law.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
So that's where the language, the law, the Tennessee law language.
Because I'd had a
comes in.
couple questions about that. I think that might have been where some of the confusion came from. They're seeing that and they're hearing that it's going to be paid, but then they're seeing that and saying, yeah, it doesn't make sense. So cool. Thank you for that. The other thing I'd asked you this earlier, but we do have some families where husband and wife are both employed by the county.
Correct.
Or, by the school system. And if they have a child, then both the mother and the father have the ability to take the parental leave.
They can. They can
okay.
split the time.
If they choose to.
That's correct.
Correct. All right. Thank you.
Ms. Andrews?
Yeah, to follow up on what Mr. Daniels said. One, say that again, if they're both employed through the district, do they not each get 6 weeks?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
If we have a husband and wife, they're both employed through the district.
Yes.
And it's under the leave of birth, adoption, so forth. Do they not both get 6 weeks? Both employees will get 6 weeks. So technically for their family, they would get 12 weeks.
Yes.
That's
Okay.
correct.
I think what
They
he was
don't have
saying
to
is,
split the 6 weeks.
I think what he
between
was saying is you could take 6 weeks and your spouse could take 6 weeks after that, so you could get a 12-week total
them. Okay.
with the child.
Or they could take 6 and 6 together.
Together. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
6 and 6 together.
The other kind of piggybacking also off of Mr. Daniels is maybe to help it not be confusing with where the language is. Should we move that language up to underneath where the parental section is to,
I don't think.
or add it twice, or have it in both places?
I think I think that the problem is that the federal government requires certain language to be in policy about FMLA leave. My concern, Mr. Wright, jump in if I'm wrong, but my concern is I think you want to leave the federal part intact. I think the real thing is for us to send an email. You know, once we pass this, I'll email all the employees and let them know about the leave and specifically say it. And then we can push it out through principals and through our communications. But I mean, my concern is I don't really want to put.
I'm saying within this same policy, just move it. So like right now where we have a large portion of where we're adding in the federal law, underneath that it says general principles, and then B under general principles is parental leave. So do we want to include the language that's farther down that's highlighted green in that section as well, so that, do you see what I'm saying?
I do.
So then even if we had it in both sections, so that it's not like, if they stop reading there, they don't miss it. Yeah.
You know, another way we could communicate this too is through a Q&A. Just come up with a Q&A to send out along with any policy revisions that we send out to the employees, and specifically outline, you know, what's required now under Tennessee law.
In Williamson County that they kind of have a pamphlet type of thing that's like, hey, how is it? And it is kind of an FAQ.
Exactly.
And so that might, something like that too, would maybe be beneficial to have within our website, so that when they come and look and say, hey, do it.
And I think the thing about leave is that we want policy to be solid, which I think this one is. But then it's going to somewhat always be individualized between the employee and when they meet with our FMLA team. Because, I mean, you could have like, my wife's going to take 3 weeks, I'm going to take 3 weeks, and she's going to take 3 weeks, but it may be we're going to take 12. You know, there's going to be so many, like, I almost prefer, I love the Q&A and I love that idea, but I think like the main thing is to encourage employees to meet and talk so that we can do what's best for them. That almost, you know, requires, you know, and the flexibility, like if you have preeclampsia, if you have a C-section, if you have different things like that, whatever you planned before may change dramatically at the time the child is born. And I think that, you know, what's been good in Mr. Ott's department is our FMLA team does a really good job of communicating with employees to make sure that they're getting full advantage of the benefits that they have.
So the 6 week, I may be getting this completely wrong, but the 6 weeks is this part in section 2, right? The policy statement, we're given 6 weeks for 6 weeks of paid leave for a mother or father of a newborn birth or a adoption, correct? Is there a reason, I mean, did we just leave out foster placement on that section? Because it's in the FMLA piece, but it's not in that part. Are we not including foster placement as well?
No, it's under the parental leave law, under section B1.
Yes, but I'm talking about the part that specifically states that we're going to provide 6 weeks of paid leave. It doesn't include that. I just want to make sure that we are going to include foster placement as well as adoption, or I guess I'm asking that question.
I see what you're saying. No, it's under A, combined 12 weeks. It identifies there the placement of a foster child again in order to, so it's there. I'm not sure where you're missing where it's not covered.
I understand that to be the part that's just, you can take FMLA if you, non-paid FMLA if you.
You're saying is it part of the Tennessee parental leave?
I'm asking, is it part of the Tennessee, and is it going to be part of our district policy to give a 6 week paid
Oh,
leave?
yes, I understand.
Because right now, on that line, it's not including foster placement.
I know it covers birth, stillbirth.
It says in there foster care is only eligible for 12 weeks.
That's correct. I need to follow up on that.
We can get an answer. from
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, I would be a proponent of,
Doing it.
of including that if we're going to include adoption, and you know, I got some great teachers that I know that just two different ones that have just done this recently, so you know, want to make sure to include that just as much as the others. So
Yeah, we're going to have to think through that one a little bit. Yeah.
Mr. Daniels?
Yeah, just again, to clarify the policy in general, FLMA, federal law, states that employees, if they have events that allow them to qualify for FMLA, can take up to 12 weeks of leave. That's federal government law, correct? That's federal law. What we're saying in the Tennessee state law, the change for this policy, what we're saying is that in instances related to the Parental Leave Act, they can still take 12 weeks.
Right.
However, 6 weeks of those will be paid plus any additional accumulated time. So if they had 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, if a husband and wife or spouse had accumulated time, then they could figure that out. And that's where you're saying it's important to get with the HR department, fill out the paperwork, and figure out what's best for the parents. But FMLA in general is still 12 weeks unpaid leave, but this just allows for the 6 weeks of parental leave.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yes, you would still have up to 12 weeks with FMLA, but 6 weeks would be under the Tennessee parental leave. So you would have that. You wouldn't lose sick days or pay during that time.
And this policy doesn't apply to anything else covered by FMLA, correct?
Right. Just
Okay. Gotcha.
parental leave.
All right.
Mr. Daniels, you done? All right, seeing no more lights on. Next item on the agenda is discussion regarding revision policy 4.302, field trips and excursions on first reading. Dr. Langford.
Yes. So if you look at this policy, I'm pulling it up right now. Basically, it's Mr. Ott can jump in here again too. Basically, what we're looking at is clarifying language on how we do field trips, specifically students riding with teachers in terms of liability, getting driver's license information on whoever's driving the car for our insurance company and for insurance purposes. And then the school nurse must be notified of all school field trips in advance. Ms. Herron will tell you this is a struggle and a challenge. We have increasingly larger number of students that need medical assistance, and we can't, you know, in the old days, people rolled the dice and went on field trips, and that's not a good policy or practice. So we want to make sure, you know, first we want to make sure that all of our kids can go on every trip and have the same opportunities as everyone, and that may for some students require someone to give medicine, someone to provide medical attention, and we want to make sure that we have that covered. You can't come in 2 days before a field trip and say, hey, we need nurse coverage, because we also need the nurse coverage at the school, and they have to make most of it. So this is an effort to clarify that. Is that correct, Lisa? Did I miss
Yeah,
anything?
no, that covers it. I mean, we've done an extensive job this year and last year on updating all of our field trip forms to include those trips that are going just locally, in-state, out-of-state, and then also overnight. We've updated our policy to include chaperones and how we check for background check all chaperones if they're going on an overnight trip or on a out-of-state trip. This change in the policy really identifies any children jumping into a faculty employee's car and going to an event. And that's why we didn't have anything in the policy prior to that, and we wanted to identify that. And then we have subsequent forms that we're asking for too, for the parental approval for that to happen, and then also getting driver's license and proof of insurance from that driver when they're taking students in their own personal car to an event.
Mr. Lacy?
I was just curious on the proof of insurance. Does the teachers or the employees' insurance cover the kid? Or if they're saying that there was an accident, would our insurance take care of that situation, or is it strictly the employee's responsibility?
Well, that's an excellent question. and I really don't know.
It's a gray area. It's one of the biggest problems we have because we have a lot of teachers and coaches providing transportation to events. You know, you're limited. Used to, we had a fleet of 15 passenger vans that we use. There's not an insurer on earth that will insure those anymore. And so this is something, I don't know that there's an easy answer to that problem.
I don't know there is either. I mean,
Because if we're expecting the teachers to cover it, maybe, you know, my wife's a teacher, sometimes she has to take kids, you know, do we need to have a higher insurance rating on her insurance because she's having to take kids from contests and stuff like that? If we're asking these teachers to take this responsibility, maybe
I totally
you would
agree.
require a certain amount of insurance.
Yeah, we'll follow up with our insurance provider and just see. I mean, I hauled wrestlers for an entire year in my minivan. My daughters never forgave me because nothing produces the odor of 12 freshman wrestlers in your vehicle.
That's basically kind of the question I had, you know,
Yeah.
even before I became to the board. It's like, well, who would cover the accident,
Yeah.
us or the school?
Yeah, and I think that's a very fair question, and it's been there for a long time.
Thank you, Mr. Lacy. Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lacy stole thunder of my first question, but I was going about it a different way because I know a lot of personal insurance policies have exclusions if you use the vehicle in the scope of employment. And so I thought I wouldn't go along the lines of whose it would go on, but there's a high propensity that a teacher's insurance policy would, by that exclusion, say it's not covered. And I wouldn't want our teachers to be left high and dry where that's concerned. But my second question, so on number 9, with the school nurse being notified, I think that's wonderful. I've been on many field trips, as I have one of those students who would require health care potentially while on a field trip. Is there anything we can do to add, I don't even know how to word this, but add a point where parents of those students are also invited to come along on the field trip and put that in writing?
We really don't deny that. I mean, we can't deny a parent
Okay.
to come with a medically fragile child, so.
I just, firsthand, double checking.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Graham, my only concern on putting that in a policy
Yeah.
is I don't want to make it, because the easiest thing then would be to say, if you're the parent of a child of a medically fragile student, then you have to go on the trip. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to create a policy where
Yeah,
then
no,
we're
I don't
excluding
wanna
medically
require
fragile.
it. I
Yeah,
just-
yeah. But I think we always, because I mean, a lot of times our parents do go, and I mean, like, if
Yeah,
you're going.
more often than not, that actually happens.
Yeah.
And they're welcome.
No,
And-
there's not been a field trip for my youngest son that my wife nor I, one, have not, had the
Right.
opportunity to come
Right.
along. I just wanted to
Yeah.
make sure it was there.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I'm just always hesitant when we're writing policy to think about that scenario where, a kid gets excluded because their parent can't go, and we
Oh, yeah.
we didn't get time to get a nurse. Like, we don't want to be I don't want to get in that boat.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Ms. Andrews?
Yep. Couple of things. One, I think we need to update the language. It says students writing with teachers. Maybe we put teachers and coaches or non-faculty because it's not always a teacher that they're writing with. So
Yeah.
to include that language in there. And then also, because we do have so many coaches that are non-faculty, will that consent form be available on the website then so that we can direct them? Because I feel like that's a question that I'm going to get from coaches that I know of, like, hey, you got to fill out this form. Okay, well, where is it?
I think we would push that out through the website, but then also through our ADs to all the coaches and everything.
So we will put it on within the district website where they can easily accept. So
Yes.
under which tab do you think that would?
I have no
fall
idea.
under
We'll have to
this?
look at that and see. Yeah.
Okay, because I feel like, but yeah, we definitely need to and I don't know
We-
how the language needs to be updated to either say coaches or non-faculty or so forth
Yeah.
on that, but
Yeah, we can fix that wording.
Thank you, Ms. Andrews. Mr. Daniels?
Yeah, just a quick question. I know this is the field trip policy. Do we have a policy related to overnight sporting events, or is this policy expected, or does it cover that as well? Because I know spring break, we have a lot of baseball and softball teams that travel down south. I know we've had a number of overnight camps for basketball and volleyball teams over the past couple of weeks and months getting ready for the season. You know, and when we talk about the chaperone and who's riding with who, do we have the same language in that policy that we're including here? And do we need to, I guess would be that question.
I'm going to go to Mr. Johnson. He's looking up the policy right now.
If I could find it, we do have a policy that talks about overnight trips. Let me find it, and we can look and make sure the languages are the same. But yes, we do have a policy, because we have a policy on overnight trips that primarily its function is to say that, you know, boys stay with boys, girls stay with girls, and there's supposed to be a chaperone in every room. But let me find that policy number.
I guess my point is, if we're updating this policy, if there's any overlap between the two, we might want to make sure, I guess, the language aligns, because I think we'd want the same requirements and forms signed for if coaches or parents. I mean, I don't know how many times, you know, athletic teams have gone down to Alabama or Florida, and you've probably had kids riding with parents on these trips, either because their parent couldn't attend or you know, other reasons, family, friends, things like that. So.
Yeah, we can absolutely make that match and look at it.
Thank you.
Since I've already spoken.
This may sound out in left field, but when I was a Girl Scout mom and we went on trips, part of our policy was that we were not allowed to caravan. In other words, we were not allowed to stay together on the freeway where everybody's one right in front of the other in a group, because it increased the chances of a wreck. And so that was really drilled into us, is that you cannot caravan. Do we want to include anything like that?
I mean, we certainly could, if that's the intent, the will of the board. I think it's good. It's a good practice. Yeah, I think we can do that.
Mr. Lancaster, I meant to come to you. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good. Two questions. One, so for like, and I know that we have a separate, you said we thought we had a separate policy for like athletic, but if it's like a ongoing thing that they are going to do several times, do they have to fill us permission to ride consent form every time?
Yes. Yeah, because they're all different, correct? So those events.
Well, I didn't know, like, okay, so like the cheer team is going 6 different games throughout the season.
But they could be to different destinations.
Okay. So I didn't know if there was one from the
No.
beginning that parents signed.
No,
No,
I mean, I'm hearing no.
Yeah, I think I think that typically, I mean, we can. I'm pretty confident that what happens here is you fill out as a parent, like if your child plays wrestling or cheer or something like that, you're going to sign at the start that you're going to ride with other families. Now, we may need to look at that and see.
If they're going out of state one time.
Oh, no. Out of state would be totally different. I think we're talking about 2 different things. If you're going out of state, then that each form's going to have to be different.
Right.
But if you're going to Cheerville.
Well, I'm just thinking, even the robotics clubs or wherever they might be going, we've got 5 competitions this year, and we're going to, you know, Portland, White House, and.
Yeah, no, I think you can do that once. But I think what Mr. Ott's talking about is if you're going to Kentucky or Georgia or somewhere, that's an individual form, because that's an overnight trip, and that's going to be a little bit different than if you're. So like I know a lot of programs, like we did this like at the start of soccer season. I would sign something that my girls could ride with other parents.
I just didn't want it to get so strict, like it was like, oh, hey, you know, I gave my child, or this permission was for next Thursday's game. Well, that game gets rain delayed or something, and it's Friday, and it's like, oh, we got to fill out the form again. The other question I have is, I know a lot of times we have different clubs and teams that travel by a charter bus. Mm-hmm. So are we going to, do we have a policy on screening the drivers of those, like, or anything?
We do not, because charter buses have pretty rigid requirements on CDL and different things like that.
So, okay, but do we have any, I guess, I just didn't know, do we need to have any policy own charter bus companies, drivers, anything?
There should not be a situation where a student is on the charter bus along with the bus driver like that. Now, because the way everything else works, there should either be an approved, somebody that's passed a background check. 'Cause the whole point of why you do a background check is if they're going to be along with students. And so in a charter school situation, in a charter bus situation, the chaperone should be on the charter bus with them, like there shouldn't be.
This is not really a chaperone. This is more with number 8, where we're looking at proof of insurance, things like that. I'm just making sure that we don't have a liability issue.
No, they have to have all
Yeah, they
that.
have
For a
to.
charter bus to exist, they have to have liability insurance, they have to have, like, that's a requirement for them
I'm
to
just-
operate.
But we are making, when we reserve or when our groups go with a charter company, we're making sure that hey, show me your
Yeah, they're so heavily.
insurance and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
they're so heavily regulated.
Okay,
Yeah.
just making sure.
Ms. Lancaster, Ms. Andrews?
Yeah, so through the discussion, with that, do we also need to include, like with the permission to ride or so forth, do we need to also include parents and so forth? I know it will not surprise many of you that I often take a large group of children to different events because I can. If we get out any more bus drivers, JJ says he's giving me a number. But so for instance, right now I have children that don't drive, so they have friends who don't drive. So I a lot of times will be like, hey, yeah, jump in. For those types of things, do we need to include parents that are going to be not just the sporadic, but like, hey, I'm gonna, like when my girls were in middle school and played volleyball, and we had games. Hey, parents couldn't get to the school at 2:30 to get their kids. They could meet us at the game at 4. So I would pick up a large group and I would take them. So I was kind of like the shuttle. Do we need to include those parents that we know that are going to be on a regular basis?
Yeah, I would say, like, if you're part of a sport or a school sanctioned event, then the team would need to fill out that form to start the season.
And just kind of have your verified drivers type of thing, so then you can say, hey, they're verified, you can ride, we know you can ride with
Right,
them type of
because what you don't want to have happen is a parent thinks that their child's riding with you and nobody knows where that child
Right.
is. If I were a coach, I would want to know. I mean, like, I was paranoid about it, but I mean, I'd check 100 times.
Yeah.
And I think most of our coaches do that, but yeah, we need to, that needs to be the practice.
Okay.
Yeah.
My other question is, and I was looking for, I don't see it here, but I feel like in the past there has been a dollar amount that our field trips couldn't be over a certain dollar amount. Like, not necessarily a club trip, but just your standard classroom field trips couldn't be over a certain dollar amount. We're adding now, and I know they already were paying mileage, and now we're also paying per hour, which I'm assuming is to then pay for the driver. If that's going to adjust, do we need to look at, if that's still in place, the amount, like a max amount, do we need to look at increasing that to account for now also having to pay for the driver?
I believe that what we said was there was a max that schools would be, Amanda, correct me if I'm wrong, that would be reimbursed for an economically disadvantaged student, not a limit on the cost of the field trip, but the limit of what we would reimburse for an economically disadvantaged student to the school.
Then, cost of living and cost of everything.
Right.
We went up to 20, and so we'll reimburse the school district for that. And they typically work real hard, staying for that.
I just didn't know if now that we're adding per hour on top of mileage, do we need to look at maybe doing $25 max?
I can talk to Andrew about that, if that's just something, I think that he already
We've
applies
charged
that way.
I mean, we paid hourly for the driver as far back as I can
Yeah.
remember.
So I'll double check that that's not
Adding
a,
on to the amount. For the
We pay, like when I was an assistant principal, even,
Okay.
we paid $1 a mile plus $20 an hour for the driver.
Okay.
I'll make sure that that's not additional
I just
fund.
want to make sure that if that is going to be an additional charge in there, that if we need to increase that amount so that we're not,
I think
restricting
Andrew's just
certain-
clarifying, but I'll double check
Okay.
that. I'll definitely check.
Ms. Andrews? Ms. Hawkins?
Quick question. Is transportation of marching bands and football teams and basketball teams, is that considered field trip?
It's not considered a field trip per se. What we do for schools that don't have their, like for instance, White House, Portland, and Gallatin don't have an on-campus stadium. So those programs are not charged for transporting the band and football team on buses to home games. So we treat them just as if they were walking out the back and going to their stadium. On road trips, they do pay, like they do pay, but they would have to do the same thing in terms of like what you would see like football marching band typically is they would fill out a form at the start of the year to give their permission, their student permission to participate in the activity. Now we don't do like you would obviously we wouldn't do a ride with parents if they're going to ride the bus, but they would have to get permission for their child to be transported for an extracurricular.
Thank you, Ms. Andrews. So that's it on that. Next item on the agenda is.
I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr.
I just want to comment. I was thinking of what Ms. Hawkins said about caravanning. You know, if we put that in the policy, I'm not sure about that because, I mean, people have a general freedom to travel. How would that be enforced? And then if something were to happen and it turns out they were caravanning, would that nullify liability or would that somehow, you know, hinder an insurance claim or something of that nature? I mean, I do agree it's probably wise.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, I've gone on field trips and you know, I'm following the bus. I don't know where I'm going, so.
Yeah. You don't want to follow someone in your own family because insurance,
Right.
if you rear-end your spouse, they won't pay for that.
Yeah, so, I mean, maybe it could be suggested, you know, hey, guys, don't caravan.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
Yeah. I think we can definitely suggest it at a minimum.
okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Gaines. Okay. All minds clear on that one? All right. Next item on the agenda is discussion regarding draft policy 6.2001, final exam exemptions upon first reading. That you again, Mr.
Yes, sir. I'm
Dr.
passing
Blackburn?
out
All right.
Skinner and Dr. Causey pulled together an outline for you of what all our high schools are doing right now in terms of exam exemptions. I'll mess this up, give you a chance to look at it a little bit. You also have a draft policy proposed by Mr. Graham that's shared on board docs. Middle schools don't do, just to give you a little update on what we do, middle schools don't do exam exemptions. High school, we don't give exams in EOC courses. We made that determination a couple of years ago because it was going to be basically when you added the percentage of the exam and the percentage of the EOC, it was a significant portion of their grade. And, you know, for instance, they've just finished in EOC courses, they've just finished their EOCs a week or so before the end of the semester. And kids, I think we can all agree, kids all take enough tests now. But in courses that don't have an EOC, we allow exams. And to be honest, I mean, as you can see, there's some similarities between all the policies, but there's not any real overarching consistency. And I can tell you, I became a high school principal in 2014. I was a high school teacher from 2009 to 2014. And we've been all over the place, you know. Basically, I think most of the time, exam exemptions began as an incentive for attendance. Chronic absenteeism has been high. It was really high in high school for a long time, and then it dipped. And then after COVID, it's gone way back up again. So exam exemptions were an effort to provide incentives for students to come to school. As you can see, that some schools have added other things, behavior, different things like that. Ms. Skinner, did you want to add anything?
I would just like to share a perspective from a principal that I got an email from this week. So I'd like to read the email. It's not very long, but just so you can get a perspective from this principal's on exemptions. So I read the proposed exam exemption policy on the agenda. The 2 or 3 unexcused absences part does not need to be on there at all. The rest of it seems to be what we are doing already. However, we have added a part to fight chronic absenteeism. We exempt with an A or a B and no unexcused absences. And here's a new one. The student wanting to exempt cannot have missed more than 10% of the total days for the semester. Parent notes and excused notes. So for example, a semester is typically 90 days. Therefore, a student cannot have missed 9 or more days for the semester and still be exempt. This is fighting chronic absenteeism. Here's why you need to take out the part about being exempt and still having unexcused absences on your attendance chart. Take this scenario, for example, and it happens all the time because kids are typically smarter than us. You have a kid with a solid B average. He already knows he can be exempt based on his grade. So now he looks at his absences. If he has only missed 5 days during the semester, all excused due to doctor or dentist notes, he still knows he has 5 parent notes he has yet to use. If you throw in an additional 2 unexcused days, here's what happened in the past. They will miss the last 7 days of the semester. How, you ask? He uses his 5 parent notes backed up by 2 unexcused days that do not keep him from being exempt. It happens all the time. That is why we got rid of the unexcused days. 5 parent notes and unlimited excused notes is already part of board policy. There is nothing we can do about those. Since we are trying to combat chronic absenteeism, we highly discourage anyone being able to exempt an exam with an unexcused day. So just wanted to share that perspective with you.
And I think that, where chronic absenteeism hits harder in high school is that we're on a 4x4 block. So the number of days are compressed anyway. So if you miss a day on a block, it's really more than like on an elementary or middle school schedule where we're going year round. You're missing a larger part of the course. But you've had Mr. Graham's policy, and this is just wanted to share with you what for your study what our different schools are doing. I think there's some really interesting things. There's probably some practices we'd like to move away from, but we're happy to share. We'd be happy to bring high school principals in to speak, or to get a team together to look at it and make some recommendations, whatever y'all would like to do. But just wanted to throw that out there for you to look at.
Mr. Lacy?
So all of our schools are doing something a little bit different? That's
Yes.
What this,
Yeah. Yeah. And some of that, Mr. Lacy, is like, for instance, Mr. Woods that Frank just read a letter from. Hopefully David doesn't mind that I shared his name, but Frankie was really careful. I was not. But David and I go way back. I think he'll forgive me. Mr. Gregory, if you don't tell him, I think we'll be okay. But, when he went to Portland High School in 2013, they had a pretty steep chronic absenteeism problem. And he's worked really hard to bring that number down. And I think that's where, so some of the schools where you see more of the attendance stuff, it's in an environment where there was more of a record of chronic absenteeism. They were just trying to get kids to be at school so we could teach them. Other schools, it's not as big a deal. And, for a long time, we had several schools that only allowed seniors to exempt. I think that we've gone through kind of a transition. We used to want kids to take exams to get them ready for college. Now we're in a place where kids are taking a lot of tests and a lot of high stakes tests, so they're probably pretty ready for testing when they go to college.
I would like to share too that chronic absenteeism, if you're above 10%, it can keep you from being a reward school.
Yeah.
Mr. Gregory?
If your chronic absenteeism rate is above 10%, it can keep you from being a reward school, even if you meet all the other markers.
And the reason that's a thing in high school is it becomes the positive of block scheduling is what you saw upstairs with AP recognition. With 32 classes, kids can take, like for instance, when I was in high school, I had to choose after my sophomore year whether I was going to do football, college prep, or FFA. I could do 2, but I couldn't do all 3. Now kids can pretty much do all 3. Both my daughters took theater every semester the entire time they were in high school. It lets kids do that plus a host of other things. That's a positive to that. But what it does, a downside is if you're a kid that, Mr. Woods is referencing a kid that works the system a little bit, you have the ability to opt out of classes and not worry, and so kids tend to miss. And what we're trying to, I think a longer, broader conversation for us as a board and as a school district is to look at how do we take advantage of those extra blocks to provide more opportunities for kids to be engaged in their learning so that they don't miss. I think that's one step. I don't really think an exemption policy yay or nay takes us down the road of engaging students in the way that we want to for the future of high school education.
Well, from looking at all these, we got schools doing multiple things. I mean, that's obvious. And for no other reason than the fact that we have students transferred from one school to another during the school year or during a semester or even at the end of the school year. I personally think it needs to be a uniform policy.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, let me say this. I think principals need to get together. And I think Dr. Langford feels the same way. And bring to us what they feel like would be best throughout the county. And usually there's one or two that's gonna be resistant to anything that's brought up. I'm just saying what's possible. And that's not good. But it needs to be uniform. But none of us run a high school. I've been in one for many years. But at the present time, we do not go day to day with what the needs for the students and to sell also what's best for parents for education in our county. I mean, I think this is a minor problem compared to what I'm seeing on the news of some other counties. I really do. And from watching news, I think we've had the best school start possibly in the history of the county. And I credit our staff for that. And I don't know, do you have a plan to meet with principals or?
Yeah, I think my thoughts were tonight, and I'm open to whatever y'all think. My thoughts were we gather all the feedback from you. We've got a principals meeting on August 22nd. So I don't know if I can get it turned around before. It's hard for us to pull principals out of a building right now, right at the start of school.
Well,
but we will have them here for a half day on August 22nd, and they will have an hour and a half in grade band time. My recommendation was going to be for me to ask Ms. Skinner to get with Dr. Causey and them put together, like take Mr. Graham's policy. I think honestly, I think a big help too is going to be looking at what everybody's doing and then see if they have some recommendations or thoughts, and then we can get back together and look at it. And I will say that the one hard thing that will be to change it immediately is that we've already communicated this out through student handbooks and things like that. So we have to think about when we would implement it. Because I can assure you, when you've got kids that are determining valedictorian, South, and salutatorian and things like that, they know that student handbook backwards and forwards. So we would want to do that in a way that's fair to all students. That's the hard thing about high school with the blocks, with 4x4 block scheduling is we try to do whatever we do first semester, keep it the same for second semester. But I mean, that's all up for conversation here. I'm just these are just thoughts when I've communicated with principals, what they've shared with me.
And that salutatory and valedictorian situation starts as early as sophomores.
It's about 7th grade.
Or 2nd grade. Okay.
Yeah, I was always amazed. The kids that were up at the top, they could not only tell you what they made on the test, they could tell you what every other kid around them in class rank made on the test.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Dr. Langford, Ms. Skinner reaching out and getting all these. I actually did it on my own too, and I'm sure you guys are able to do it more quickly than I was for sure. I was going to each website and copying and pasting and all that kind of thing. What I tried to come up with is I actually tried to blend every school into kind of a coherent policy, because these high schoolers, they are quite competitive, and they're competitive with each other, trying to get into college programs and trying to get scholarships. And we have a senior this year, and I can tell you that 0.1 of a percentage point can be the difference between thousands of dollars in scholarships. It could be the difference between getting into the school you wanted to get into or not get into. And truth be told, my son goes to Liberty Creek. Liberty Creek, if you look in this form, actually has no exam exemption policy. And so the 130 seniors at Liberty Creek this year, in my opinion, are at a little bit of a disadvantage against the rest of the district, and that includes Merrill Hyde. Merrill Hyde has an exemption policy for their seniors. And so, one of the greatest schools in the country with some of the best academic rigor also has an exemption policy, and Liberty Creek does not. So I thought, in fairness and in equity, it'd be a good idea to have one policy district-wide, and it's based on all the other policies which the principals have come up with. I kind of disagree with the absences to a point. I get it. I want to incentivize as well. I would 100% be open to adding that 10% rubric in there. I think that would definitely keep things in check, even with the unexcused absences. But I would say that if a kid's getting a B or an A average and missing classes and still able to do that without the instruction, kudos to them. I would also like to point out, I went a step further. I reached out to other school systems too. And every county that touches Sumner County, excluding Robertson, has a district-wide exemption policy. So our kids are competing against them as well. And if you have an A or a B going into a final, for the most part, unless you do well, a final is going to hurt you. And, I would hate for a kid 3 weeks left in school to lose that scholarship money or lose out on that college or university they wanted to go to. But all the counties who touch us, minus Robertson, have a district-wide exemption policy. And also Rutherford County, Williamson County, both have district-wide attendance policies. And JP2 and Davidson Academy have school-wide exemption policies. And so I'd definitely love to see us get something going. I'd really love to see it enacted this year, especially for those 130 plus seniors at Liberty Creek and our innumerable seniors district-wide. But I do appreciate everybody taking so much time on this. I think I threw this on you, Dr. Langford, maybe the week before school started, something like that. And I can't imagine being a new director at the beginning of school in a district this size, and then some school board member says, "Hey, by the way, I want to make a giant change," and you entertained it. So I appreciate that. But if anybody has any questions for me in my research, I certainly am happy to answer it as well.
Yeah, and I think that I think that's what we always want to do what's best for our kids. So it's fair.
I guess on this new policy, it's got 3 or less unexcused absences. Why would a kid need unexcused absences if they go to the doctor, dentist? That would be excused right with a doctor's note.
Well, I'll tell you, Mr. Lacey, when you have high school kids or middle school kids even, you can even write them a note as a parent, put it in their backpack. It doesn't always get turned in. But we do have some kids that just miss a lot of school, and that's what we're trying to combat. And I think, to be fair, we have parents that it's hard for them. They can't afford to take their child to the doctor for a stomach ache or something like that. They're not going to pay a $35 or $50 copay for it. So they'll use their parent notes, and if they have extended illness beyond that, they just take the unexcused absences.
So would a parent's note be considered unexcused? Or?
No, a parent's note is excused, but you're limited to 5 a semester. But you have unlimited doctors. Like, if a kid I mean, like, we've had kids, I can remember when I was in middle school AP, this tended to hit more in middle school than high school, but kids that are wrestling with strep, doctors don't like to take tonsils out anymore, and you'll have kids that'll miss sometimes 50, 60 days with tonsillitis. So those are all excused because they're under a doctor's care. So what we're really talking about are kids that just, we have a significant number of kids that miss without, especially in high school, without their parent. Like, parents get up and leave for work at 5 a.m. They expect their child to make it to school, and sometimes between point A and point B, they find point C.
Well, I was one of those kids, and I had to take up to make the final exam because sometimes when I was in high school, I'd want to sleep in. But like I said, if the whole deal is to get kids to go to school, I don't know if I'd be in favor of, allowing them so many unexcused absences. If we need our kids to go to school and to do good, I would like to know from other board members why that would be needed. Because like I said, we need our kids to go to school and to learn and not miss.
Yeah. One, I want to say thank you, Mr. Graham, for bringing this forward. This is something that has been on my list for a number of years, and it definitely was one of the things that I was hoping to check off by the end of my tenure. So I'm glad that this is something that we are addressing. I think having a district-wide exam exemption policy is needed. We have a lot of families that are blended families, and it can get very confusing where it's like, you have students at 2 different schools, and it's like, okay, well, they're going to school today because they're not exempt, but they have to go because their school does it differently. And, especially when you get around the holidays or you're starting to look at summer vacations, you're like, okay, wait, who has to go when? I know I've had to make charts, even for my own children, to figure out when they have to go and who has to go. So I think as having a uniform district policy helps. I think it helps with, social media because of parents sharing and are like, my kids are going or not going. They'll say, hey, what's going on with this? And they may share Gallatin's exemption policy, but their kid goes to beach. And so you think you're getting accurate information and you're not. So definitely think that needs to take place. I agree that I think our principals should get a stab at it. They understand what's going on in their buildings, and all the intricacies of why they have made certain decisions that they've made. So I do think that we do need to send it to our principals and let them have a stab and say, hey, here's all of y'all's policies. Here's kind of what we're thinking. What can y'all all agree on? Just kind of similar to how we did the dress code. I think, they have valuable information. And in those small details, those things that we may not think of the why behind why they made the decisions. Just like you said with Mr. Woods at Portland, that, he has done a great job working on absenteeism. Okay, so that's something that's specific for him. I know other schools I'm sure deal with it as well. So how do we compromise on that? I agree personally with the absences. Why, I don't think it should be necessarily unexcused absences. I think absences are absences. I know that's how, I can say that for my students that go to beach. That's how we've done it. We've operated, and students know that. A couple of things I do think that we need to decide is, when are we expecting the policy to take effect? If this is something that, we're wanting to do this school year, we're kind of behind the curve on that. Like you said, you want to do for second semester the same thing that you do for first semester. And so if that's the case, if we're looking at really to institute it for next school year, then what is our timeline? What are we going to do as far as being able to chew on this, process it, talk about it, and make sure that we get it right? Another thing I think we need to take into consideration as our principals look at the policies. I had a great conversation with one of our principals this weekend who was talking about too, where, several of our schools have, if they have one absence with a C average, then they can be exempt from exams. Well, right now a C can be a 70. Do we really want to, students who are within that range, do they really need to be exempt, or do they we need to make sure that they've got the material? And I think that was a great point to make, that with the change to our grading scale, do we need to look at that aspect of it? As I discussed it with my own children, my daughter made the point of, why is it that we have to take an AP test and then we have to turn around and take an exam as well, but with ESCs, they don't take one? I was like, you know what? That's a valid question. That's a valid point to make of those AP tests are hard. And so that would maybe be something too that we consider as putting an exemption in there, much like the ESC.
Yeah, I think, Ms. Andrews, I think you hit on a couple of things that we need to take into our thinking. I think for a lot of kids, the purpose of exam exemptions is to have that last week of the semester off. So the question is that our why for why we give exams? So I think that's a question we need to explore too, is what is the purpose of exams? Are exams meeting that purpose? Like I'm kind of shocked that, I mean, as a former AP teacher, I never gave an exam after the AP exam because they just took a 4-hour test that was very, very rigorous. I think that would be a question I would like to pose to the principals too, is like, what are we hoping to achieve? Because, we used to have where basically, we were struggling to keep kids in the last week of school, so we tweaked some things to have, where the last week of school wasn't just an afterthought, because elementary and middle schools are saying, like, none of the high school kids are in the building the last week of school. I think we need to determine what our goal is, what we're hoping to accomplish with exams, and start there, and then say, what does an exemption policy give us that makes that worthwhile? What are we incentivizing? Is it behavior? Is it academic performance? Is it attendance? It could be any or all of those things, and I think you see that in what's reflected in some of these different schools. I think that's where. But I think we could operate on the timeline that as a board, you choose. But I do think, like, what I'm probably going to do is ask Ms. Skinner to meet with the principals on August 22nd, and we can get that information to you by that night. We won't be able to put it on board docs ahead of time, but we'll be able to get you that information, and maybe even try to get Dr. Causey or a couple of principals to come and speak, or Ms. Skinner do a presentation or something like that about it. So we can certainly look at that.
And I also want to add, on a couple of our schools, they include tardies as far as equivalences with absences. I think that is important because, again, kids like to manipulate the system. They are smart, but they are sneaky. Teenagers are sneaky, and they will manipulate the system if they can. So I think, if they're like, well, I wasn't absent. No, but you were late every day for an entire month. So it's like, to incentivize that. And then also, like I said, is having that conversation with a principal made a great point of talking about, kind of to what the definition of final exam is, because with our theater kids, their final exam a lot of times is a performance. So if you're exempt from that, then the whole thing falls apart. Like, that's part of it. Or some of our classes are work-based, or project-based, not work-based, project-based. So they're still going to be expected to present that project. And so there wouldn't be an exemption there. So I think in addition to, we have this discussion often. A lot of times we do things because that's the way they've always been done. And I do feel like, we're kind of at an era where you, as you said, we kind of need to step back and go, what's the why? What is our why? What is the goal? Why are we doing what we are doing? Whose benefit is it to? Because we want to make sure that we're making decisions that's in the best interest of students. But then on the flip side too, we want to be respectful of the job that the teachers are doing and the work that they're putting in, and let's be respectful for them as their profession. And then come up with a comprehensive. But I do think that as a board, we need to decide. I feel like if we're going to have the conversation that needs to happen, and we want to do this well, that realistically speaking, then we are looking at developing a policy and language that will then be for next year, not this school year. And that, if that's the case, then we need to make sure too that we're communicating that well, that when it does get approved, whatever happens is for students to understand that this is effective August 2024.
Thanks, sir. I was going to ask if I could make a request when you guys meet with the principals. Is there any way to bring up their discretion on the absences? Because you do have students, like you mentioned, Dr. Langford, who might have strep all year long. And I don't think it's fair to them to say you can't be exempt because you had a bacterial infection that you couldn't prevent, that we didn't want you to spread to everybody else in the classrooms. And so maybe if we, we have like the 10% threshold, but also give principals discretion to override that, because the principals know these individual situations more so. They know which kids, sleeping in and not come to school, and, that kind of thing.
Yeah, or like, another example is a kid that tears an ACL in an athletic competition representing the school, and they miss a week for surgery. That's
Right. Yeah. So just,
I think the discretion part's a good idea.
yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Gregory?
During your research and meeting with principals, it's very important to educate parents about the program. My wife and we have two daughters. One of them went K through 12, did not miss a day. The other one went K through 12, missed 6 days, all in the 2nd grade. One year, strep throat and something, back to back. And a lot of that, it comes through parenting. And also, if this is allowed now, I'm not even sure if it is, Dr. Langford, school motivation. Students will do anything for a discount on a pizza or a Subway. Is that allowed, that you get a certificate every 6 weeks, or I guess we're on 12 weeks now?
Yeah, we have schools that do a lot of different incentives, and I know even like Melanie's office, our attendance office here does a lot of stuff to provide incentives for attendance. I mean, we've even had a couple years ago, they gave away some cars for attendance, and that was a while back, but
that
those were donated by a car dealership, not made the CFO a little nervous there.
Or ice cream. I forgot that one. Ice cream,
Yeah, our schools have a lot of it. I mean, they're trying everything to try to find ways to get kids to come to schools, and they do a tremendous job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. Ms. Hawkins?
I agree with Ms. Andrews about that we need to keep our focus on our mission statement as a school system. And for some reason, I feel like we are twisting ourselves in a pretzel just to get kids to school. And it's kind of like the tail wagging the dog. We are doing all this just to get kids to go to school. I personally, when I see someone who has gotten perfect attendance for every single year through the school, I'm thinking he went to school sick. And so when you start using attendance as incentive, you're going to have sick kids come to school. You may have kids skip school, but you're also going to have sick kids coming to school. So I know that my kids, when they got to college, they all were exempt from their exams in high school because they had the grades, they had the attendance. They told me, man, oh man, I wish I had taken those final exams, because college, it was a big smack in the face. It would have helped them. So I'm not sure what the answer is, but call me old-fashioned. This was not something that was the carrot in front of a student in my day that you didn't have to take exams. Everybody had to take exams. That was just, you took exams. You took final exams. And so I just want to make sure that we don't have the tail wagging the dog here. Thank you.
Ms. Hawkins, Mr. King?
Yeah, so yeah, I teach college freshmen, and I may have to try this exemption strategy to get them to show up. But I had a student that was there every day, every class, and she ended up failing the course because, I don't know, her attendance was great, but she just did not master the content. And I was shocked to see that, but there was nothing I can do. So yeah, back to what Dr. Langford was saying. What is the purpose of the exam? What is the goal? And I think it's to demonstrate mastery of the content. And if there's another means for students to demonstrate that, then by all means exempt them. But we got to make sure that that those other measurements, those other ways of demonstrating mastery are credible. You just don't want to exempt a student, if they've not shown that they know the material and I teach a college music theory class, and that's really a skill development course. And if the final exam really is they can't move up unless they get a C, and so it really is about assessment. It's about making sure they know the content. And if I just don't want to exempt them if they don't know it. And I guess is my point. For seniors, I don't know. Maybe that's a little bit different. I mean, you do want your senior, any student taking a course, you want to have some type of assessment to know that they are getting the content. And so anyway, I just think we need to define that. One other thing on the new policy that I want to bring up that I think that just kind of caught my mind. At the bottom it says students eligible for exemption may still be permitted to take the final exam. And I can see the scenario where a student has a B, they want to try to take the exam to get an A. What would happen, and I guess my concern is if they completely bomb the test, if they're exempt already, is there a threshold, like if it's not going to improve their score, can we make it so that it does not count against them?
Yeah, I think most schools, most teachers that I've known that a kid chose to take it, they gave them the higher of the two grades. They didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that. And I wanted to clarify, Mr. Kim, if it's okay, because I think you hit on something, is just to refresh us that what we're talking about is non-EOC subjects. So every high school student is going to take an end-of-course exam in English 1, English 2, Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, Biology, U.S. History, and then in addition to that, dual enrollment classes, AP tests. And so our kids are receiving a large number of tests and exams. They're in a very rigorous testing program. So I think that, Mr. King, just to think about the mastery component, I think is where we want to go. It's like, what does it mean to demonstrate mastery as we're thinking about what an exemption would look like? Yeah, I'm not sure that would help with freshmen though.
I don't know. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. King. Mr. Daniels?
Yeah, I want to say, I think when I was a senior at Gallatin High School, I think at the time only seniors were allowed to be exempt from finals. And it was kind of one of those things that you look forward to as an upperclassman, being able to be exempt. Again, you had to get certain grades and things like that. That being said, I do think having a consistent policy is where we need to go. We've done it with dress code. This is one of the other big things where we get a lot of feedback from parents and students, especially around exam season. What's the policy here? Why is it different here? Why does my kid have to go when yours doesn't? But I think one of the points that Ms. Andrews raised, and I think you commented on it as well, was, if we're going to exempt from exams, then what's the point of the last couple weeks of school? Like, what's going to get the kids to be in the classroom? I think even, and I know we're talking about high school here, but I think about, middle school and elementary students. As soon as standardized testing is done, like, you talk to the principal and they're like, the kids are ready to go, teachers are ready to go. They've, that's where they're getting tested on the mastery of the subject, from the standardized testing standpoint. We can agree whether that's the right measure or not, I think, or disagree on whether that's the right measure or not. But, I think the conversation with the principals is, what is the point of those last couple weeks of school? If I'm a senior, yeah, it's getting with my friends those last couple weeks. It's, getting the cap and gown and going through all the rehearsals and those types of things. But if 60% of a high school is exempt, then the last week of school, it's basically going to be empty anyway. And so, and if we're not going to have our high school kids in that last week because the majority of them are exempt, then what happens is there's trickle down. If I'm a junior and, my son or my daughter is exempt and I've got a child in middle school or elementary school, maybe I start that family trip a week early because, it's the last week. What am I going to learn? So I think that conversation about what's the point, what are we trying to learn, and it's not just I think a Sumner County thing. I mean, the state mandates 180 days. How many of those days in every community? If you went to 170 days, and I hate to say take away learning, but now you could start a week later or 2 weeks later, and the kids could have more time. I don't think that's where we necessarily want to go, but I think there's more to the conversation if we're going to start talking about the exemptions and how that impacts the other schools, middle school, and those families that have children in different grade levels and different bands. And I think that's a great conversation to have, and it's probably more than just the next couple of board meetings as we figure it out, and we need to have that input from those from staff. So.
Thank you, Mr. Daniels. Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to give a couple comments on both Mr. King and Mr. Daniels. On Mr. King's question, how do we determine mastery? I think if a student's maintained the A or the B average throughout the course of the semester, that in itself shows that they have mastery. And then I appreciate what Mr. Daniels said, and that brought up another question, is when you guys meet with the principals, the schools that have these attendance or these exemption policies, like Gallatin with the C average up to 1 absence for an 18-week course, 0 absences for a 9-week course. If you could also get feedback from them on what their attendance looks like and all that kind of stuff, if they see a lot of attendance drop off after exemptions. I would assume that after kids take a final exam, they're probably checked out and not come to class anyway. And so I don't know that an exemption would make much more difference on that. But I would love to know that data from each of these high schools that have existing exemption policies as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Mr. Gregory?
We just recognize the highest number of AP scholars in the history of Sumner County.
Mm-hmm.
I would guess that they'd had very few absences.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. All right. Mr. Lacy?
What schools do have the best attendance?
High school.
Yeah, high schools. That would be good to
Good.
know, 'cause, I mean, we
Good
can kinda
would
look
be
at their policy.
Good for high school would be relative the last couple of years. It's been a struggle in high school. Merrill Hyde Magnet obviously would be the top. I can pull that information. I don't know off the top of my head, Mr. Lacy, but we can certainly pull that. But that's a nationwide phenomenon right now, which is one of the reasons why I think we've got some serious questions to ask about how we're connecting students into their learning in different ways in the future. I don't think that, I think incentives help with attendance, but I think there's a larger thing to look at there as well. But we can certainly get that information.
Thank you, Ms. Lacy. Okay, looks like all on that one. Next item on the agenda, before we get into that, let me give us a word here. As long as we're talking about the policy and we stick to the policy, we won't have to clear the room and do executive session. So let's be careful not to chase rabbits and get off into things that we don't need to be talking about in public. So let's just stay on the policy, and so that one is discussion and interaction regarding draft policy 3.205, door locks prior to first reading. Dr. Lang.
First, I want to say, Ms. Skinner and I have been in 24 schools over the last 7 days, and the only door that we've seen unlocked was, it was locked. It was closed by a student that had just come back from the bathroom, and the student just didn't close. We were right behind them, and it just didn't close hard enough, so we closed it. But I can tell you, in my history in Sumner County Schools, I've never seen locked doors like we're seeing right now. Our teachers and principals are doing and SROs are doing a tremendous job of making sure doors are locked. So I'm really thrilled about that. And I think, it's interesting. I had a conversation with an SRO today when we were in Portland, and he said he preferred I asked him which lock he preferred, and he said he preferred the lock that locked automatically, so the door locked as soon as it closed. So I think we're pretty much all, I know we've had a lot of conversation because the legislation specifically says a button on the lock, but I think what we feel, and Katie, Ms. Brown, jump in here, I think what we all feel is that we can confidently say two things. One, nobody higher up is ever going to give us an answer on button versus no button. And two, we think that what this lock would do is it goes beyond the extent of what the law requires, so we're good there. So we're in a good position to start replacing those. Kate?
Yeah, and that was Mr. Lacey's point as well, that this lock and I've discussed it with numerous law enforcement and first responders and folks, and I know Mr. Lacey did a lot of research as well, that when you're looking at in an emergency, you have to look at human error, you have to look at the technology, you have to look at all of the things that are happening, and this lock alleviates the human error piece. And I was questioning and concerning, like, if the lock malfunctioned, then we would still have to check it and we would have no way to know that it had malfunctioned. But the malfunctioning of a doorknob is much rarer than human error. And so we felt like we agreed that this is safer. It eliminates some of that error that could be on a person's part, and it functions easily. It's easy to open and close. We have some that you have to twist the key a few times to be able to open it, and so these work much simpler, and it keeps the door closed and locked.
Mr. Daniels.
Yeah, based on this policy, it says locked from the outside but accessible with a key. Is the intention that it be a physical key? The reason I'm asking is from a technology standpoint, I travel quite a bit, and when I check into a hotel, I just use my phone. I've got keyless entry, and so we say a key, and I know we're not what we're talking about right now with the doorknobs that are shown here. There is a physical key, but I could see a time if down the road we're building a new high school, we might be at a point where the doors are keyless entry. You use a key card, which I guess technically is a key in some form or fashion, but I've seen facilities. We do a lot of work on high-end facilities and condos, and facilities that are pretty locked down, and they have the keyless entry, but they've got emergency lock buttons that will automatically make sure every door is locked or whatever it is, and can't be overridden, almost kind of like a bank for a period of time, and it's located in multiple places, so if you can't access it here, somebody else can in another part if an alarm sounds. So are we limiting with the language in this policy our ability to migrate towards keyless entry if that technology comes into play, or would we just revisit the policy at that point and make that change? I don't want to so limit us here that that we can't do what we need to do to keep our kids safe when making purchases, or have to wait 60 days to get the board to change something to make that purchase.
Well, that's a good point, because we actually do already have schools that have a keyless entry or a key card, and so that's probably some language that we could tweak there. I think we sort of felt that was a broadened key, something from the exterior that you could access the classroom, but we certainly could say with a key or electronic access card or something like that, because yeah, who knows what it'll look like, a fob, an app, or something like that. So we could probably adjust that. I did want to, with your consideration, expand this policy a little bit more. The last line talks about the function of the classroom door being closed and locked at all times, and I would like to cover the exterior classroom door and the function of that it should not be used except for an emergency exit. That is also, it shouldn't be propped open or used as an entrance and things like that. And so I just wanted to make sure that we were covering all of the doors in the classroom. And so when we bring this back in on the 22nd, it will have some additional language. We'll certainly send that to you beforehand.
The other question is, the intention of the policy is to have that graphic as well? I just, again, I see the key there, and again, you might have those electronic entryways, and I could see somebody looking at this somewhere down the road and say, well, the door handles goes down instead of up, or it's flat instead of, do we need that image, I guess is what I'm saying.
No, sir.
Okay.
All right. Just kind of for our information. And I know like Williamson County and Williamson and Wilson County on their new schools, when they're doing the electronic systems, this is the lock they're using. So, but we could definitely add a key fob, key cards, whatever, to this policy.
Thank you.
Mr. Daniels, Mr. King?
Yeah, so I've got some friends that teach at Davidson Academy. They told me that this is the lock that they have on all their doors. I don't think the law says that it has to be a button. I think it just says it has to be lockable from the inside. So if there's any confusion or concern about the way the statute is written, just pulling the door shut, you're locking it from the inside, right? So, and I do think it does get rid of any possibility of human error. When I taught elementary, I had a key that I would wear, and we'd have a lockdown drill, and I had to go lock the door. And for some reason, I always was like, is it locked? What am I doing? Maybe that's just my lack of training, but that with this type of door, it would be no question. It would just be like, pull it shut, it's locked, maximum safety, peace of mind. I don't think we need the graphic on there. It already says in the policy, inside door handle is to be blank. So I think that covers that graphic. I don't know if we necessarily need that. So anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. King. Mr. Graham?
Are there, so any door lock that shall be replaced after 7/1/2023, are we making efforts to replace, or is that just as maintenance needs to replace these door locks?
As the policy is written and as the law is written, it's moving forward. Any lock that should be placed would function in this way. The other suggestion is something we can have discussion about, but this is meant to be moving forward.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Graham. Mr. Lancaster?
I know it's probably, how many, I guess, of our schools would meet this now versus, and I'm not saying tell me the schools, but just like percentage-wise, of 50 whatever schools we got, do we?
I honestly couldn't answer that. I can tell you we did do an assessment of every doorknob. There are about 2,500 in the school district, and I do have that information. I don't have it on me at the moment, but what I can also say that it wouldn't be a school-wide situation necessarily. There are a lot of schools where there have been additions made or replacements or things like that, and so there's often occasions where there are many different types of doorknobs in one school building, and I would hesitate to name any of that today.
And I guess just ballpark, what does it cost to replace one with this?
These particular locks that we're talking about are $375 a door handle.
Commercial grade.
And you said we got 25. Yeah, I would just, I'm going back to, I'm not saying we gotta this year do it, but this should be something we, maybe as a board, we try to do over the course of, hey, we gotta buy 2027, we're going to have all our locks like this or whatever.
Yeah, I think so that we don't get down the rabbit trail where we need to close the doors and everything. I think that that's something we put in the hopper for our long, our short and long-term security planning.
Thank you, Mr. Lancaster. Mr. Wise?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I attended the pre-opening of schools meetings that the administrators had at each of my schools in my district. And I would like to commend them because every one of them just stressed the safety measures that we're taking. And it's a top priority in their training, in their communications. Each teacher is being visited by the SRO in their building to analyze their classroom, their individual classroom. And so they're receiving the training there on what to do with their students, where's the best place in this classroom for my students to gather in an event. And so I commend our SROs for that. I appreciate the Sheriff's Department supplying those SROs and hopefully more of them. Also, I appreciate the principals and the assistant principals in the training that they are conducting with our teachers, because I tell you, if that teacher is showing confidence in an incident, the children feel more confident and safer. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
And Mr. Wise, let me follow that up just for a second. Ms. Brown she led a training with our principals at our first principals meeting, and really went through the why of what we're doing. That what we're doing is making sure that every child and staff member is as safe as we can humanly be every day. And I mean, it was really eye-opening for our staff, and I think that they've carried that out to the buildings. And I think I know every building we've been in, the SROs are out, moving, meeting with teachers, doing. It's been really impressive to see.
It is being carried forth. So yes, thank you.
Mr. Daniels?
Yeah, I've got one last question. It may seem a little basic, but what's the definition of a classroom door? And the reason I'm asking is, if I'm in a middle school and I'm walking down the hallway, and I've gone and visited middle schools and elementary schools, a lot of times the doors to the gym, there's students in their gym class, but those doors are typically unlocked. Is a locker room in a gym, is that considered a classroom door? Will they have these locks? What about, I think the aviation classroom has a sliding garage door on the outside. So I mean, I'm just kind of curious, like, are we limiting ourselves when we're saying classroom doors, or do we need to be somewhat vague, big picture, because we've got a lot of different types of doors?
Yeah, I'm going to let Ms. Brown answer that one.
Yeah, sure. So we've actually been kind of analyzing that a little bit right now as our principals are out there reinforcing our procedures, that a classroom door is meant to be the space where a student would be secured during a lockdown, where instruction is happening. I know instruction happens in a gym. I understand that, but it is our procedure that would not be the space where where a class would lock down. They would move into another space. And so we have said that operationally, the large numbers of students that move in and out of that, like a cafeteria, large gathering spaces, operate a little bit differently. Classrooms where there is an adult and a group of students is the intention, where it's like that they are in there and then they would remain in there in the event of an emergency. A library is a tricky space as well, because during normal operation, people move in and out of that space, but there are classes held in there. We are asking them to lock that space when there's a class in there, because they would be able to secure themselves in that space. Does that make, it's a little bit tricky. Yeah. And so, the law names classroom doors, so I think that's why we've been able to do that. And we've sort of, we also use some classrooms as a teacher work area or an office or things like that. And so we don't consider that to be even though it was constructed, built as a classroom, it's not operating or functioning as such. And so it really isn't necessarily about the physical structure of the room. It's about how it's being used and what the expectation is in the event of an emergency.
So if a gym, for example, without going, I don't want to get in, the area that we would recommend that we would move a student group to in the event of an emergency, would that be considered the classroom door where we would have some type of?
Sure, we would want them to be able to have a place that they could secure.
All right.
Yeah, I don't know that we would name it a classroom door, but
Yes, yes.
in our discretion, we would make sure that they were able to secure the space.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daniels. All right, seeing no other red lights, by golly, we are adjourned.
Oh, Mr.
I'm sorry, Miss Hawkins.
I wanted to ask permission to respond to Mr. King's recommendation regarding field trip and the caravan. May I just make a quick statement in response? I agree wholeheartedly. It should not be a policy saying that, and I was going to recommend that it could be strongly recommended that in the form that's filled in instead.
Yeah, I think we can do that.